Hello, this is the Spirit of Truth, and chapter 1 is called God's Fingerprints. So once upon a time, my students asked me to list and explain to them the basic truths that I live by because they were hoping that that would help their life make more sense to them. And I did. I did give them that list and explain it to them, and it did make a difference. But now, during the pandemic, they're asking again. So I'm going to try again. So in a time like this, we will all have many reactions, but they kind of fall into categories. For example, one is kind of devastated, hyper, doing, because we just want to feel like we've got some kind of control, even if we don't. Well, maybe we do have control, but not in the way people think of it. And then opposite of that hyper reaction is shock and depression, almost catatonic. I'm reminded of wild animals who sense their predator and they just go dead, appearing to be dead, so that the predator won't notice them, won't bother with them. And there's kind of this sense right now that maybe we've angered God or done something so wrong, and so we just want to play dead. We don't want anybody to notice us. And then there's a place that I call balance. And there's a stillness there. And we're still noticing the other reactions, but we're not paying much attention to them. And we're still taking care of what we can take care of. And at the same time, we're not trying to fix things that we can't. We just surrender. And so, how do I stay in peace? I will say with the greatest humility what works for me. So back in, I've been peaceful most of my life, but I'm going to tell you the most recent version of this, which is that in 2015, I read a book by J. Warner Wallace. And the title of his book was God's Crime Scene. And that made me happy. I really liked that. I was fascinated. And he was a crime detective. And he used his detective skills to prove that God exists. And I was thinking about that, but it seemed that there was a much deeper truth. So a few months later, I woke up one morning, as often happens when I wake up, and I realized that God, love, is the basis of everything good, everything that we would call a blessing. But then I also realized that God, our love, is the basis of everything hard and scary and painful. And so, I can only speak for myself, but I can tell you that without a doubt, God's fingerprints are smeared all over every so-called disastrous, unfortunate event in my life. So, I'll give you the short version. So I was born without the ability to breathe or move on my own. And I was put into an incubator where I couldn't be touched for several months with a breathing machine. And you would think that that would leave me not liking touch, but I love touch. Good touch. So anyway, after I got out of the incubator, my mother couldn't be there because my father was dying. She was taking care of him, and so they just kind of passed me around from one relative, even strangers who volunteered, kind strangers, for the first year of my life. And so I didn't ever get bonded. I didn't know that I belonged to anybody. So for most of my life, I had to use breathing machines, sometimes a ventilator, sometimes just oxygen. And I was usually in a wheelchair or in my bed. And sometimes I even needed to use tubes, feeding tubes, because I couldn't swallow. I didn't have those muscles. But can you understand, can you even believe me when I tell you that I feel incredibly blessed by a life of such isolation? I had so little interaction with people that I didn't get indoctrinated. It's almost like most of my conversations were between me and God. Because my parents didn't want to spend much time. I mean, they loved me, but they didn't want to spend much time because they didn't know what to say or what to do. So I spent my days and my nights with God. And it wasn't that I was religious. I couldn't most of the time go to church, my parents' church. There was just love. There was just this amazing enfolding of me. Total acceptance. Because everybody else tended to stay away. And so I got to choose my own thoughts. I got to choose my own feelings. There was nobody to say, no, you shouldn't feel that way. Because we weren't relating that much. They didn't know what I was feeling. All I got to feel was love. And in the long run, when I was 21, I got to choose my own amazing husband, my mate. And again, God's fingerprints. He had just come home from Vietnam. And he wanted to repair the world. He wanted to replace hate with love. And so we thought about what we could do. And we didn't realize we were going to take it this far. But we ended up adopting or having guardianship of 17 very, very amazing, special children. And I don't know what to say about how they could change us this much, because everybody told us that we were saints for taking care of them. But no, they taught us who humans really are. They taught us what they needed, not just to survive, but to thrive. I learned the truth of being human from being with these children. And after the children took flight, and we're so glad they did, we still had more love to give. You know, love begets love. It just makes more and more love. And so after they left, it was like, well, what do I do with all this energy that's flowing through me now? And so my husband and I formed a nonprofit called the Radiance Center. And the Radiance Center's motto is, I always get this backwards, living to love and loving to live. And oh my God, it was an amazing time. And then after that, I wanted to go deeper. I knew some people could take it all the way into the core of their lives. So I formed the Soul. The Soul is School of Unconditional Love, where 4 days a week we practice living from that consciousness, that depth. So I told you that I'm so grateful for my isolation. But I want to know about you. Now that you're quarantined, what are you doing with this isolation? What are you doing with yourself, with God? It's not an accident that I get to spend my days reminding you of how amazing you are. You know, let's go back and look at your so-called terrible childhoods. All those traumas, all that intensity, all that interaction with your parents and your community that made you feel like you don't belong. You know, they left you thinking that you're broken, that you're limited, but you're not. Maybe the truth is that they weren't ready for you because you were so magnificent. Maybe the truth is that you're not really limited. They just didn't know what to do with your outrageous power. So I ask you, why are you alive now? I mean, right now, in this time with the COVID-19. We know that it's on purpose. We know that you chose to be here. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to know that the reason you haven't come into your power yet, but you are now, is because you are a magnificent old soul who chooses to be here right now because it's time. And maybe it's because you are literally covered with God's fingerprints. Namaste. I see you and I see your fingerprints everywhere. Blessing.